Hey everybody, welcome back to Eggs. Today's guest is Stephen Goodman. For more than 30 years, Stephen, President and CEO of SHG Planning, has provided insightful solutions to the challenges of business succession, wealth preservation, retirement, and charitable planning. Stephen currently services hundreds of clients focusing on the needs of owners and of closely held businesses and high net worth individuals. He's the author of Business Succession Planning, a guide to transfers, sales, family harmony, and minimizing litigation, and has also written numerous articles for leading trade journals. Here to talk about family business succession planning, estate planning, life insurance, planning for retirement, and preservation of wealth, please join me in welcoming to the show our guest, Stephen Goodman. How are you, Steve?
Hey guys, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're doing real well. Thanks for coming on. Glad to have you.
Thank you very much.
So we like to do a little quick background, like the history of our guests. Can you give us a breakdown of kind of how you got started in the industry and how you got to where you're at now?
Well, I grew up in the Bronx in New York, came from no money at all. Parents, unfortunately, passed away fairly early, didn't do much planning, didn't have a lot, kind of left us not in the greatest place. So I kind of like felt it firsthand what that was like. Went to school, got an undergraduate degree in accounting, went to work for one of the big accounting firms, KPMG, then worked for JP Morgan, and then about 30-ish years ago started my own consulting firm, SHG Planning, and basically got very interested in just making sure that people provide and protect themselves and their family, whether it be an accumulation of wealth, minimizing taxes, asset protection, passing down businesses, and have been doing it now for over 30 years. And every client's got their own unique situations and things you need to help them out on. And the same solution that helps one client, another client would never agree to do something like that. So you have to be able to adapt to who you're dealing with.
Yeah, no, it's funny that you say Bronx, New York. I would have never guessed from the accent. I think it's a really interesting point. You know, what I think is so intriguing about this particular set of topics is it seems like something that, I mean, most of us, I think, especially for younger people, generally try and avoid most of this. We don't like to think about, having to plan for what happens after we're dead and gone because we're yet to admit we're going to eventually be dead and gone. And so I think it's a really challenging thing, but I also think it's really important to sort of open up these kinds of conversations and have them because, like you mentioned, just even in your own experience with your family, I mean, have a lot or have a little, like a little bit of planning still goes a long way.
No question. It's funny, Ryan, because I say many times in my next life, I'm going to come back and sell red Ferraris. It's really nice to like sell something that like everybody wants to buy rather than trying to convince people to do things for their own best interest. But as you said, especially younger people, like it's so far into the future, but you'd be surprised how many very, very wealthy people you meet that are in their 60s. They either don't have a will or they haven't done it in 30 years. They don't have any insurance. They really haven't planned anything out. And you would, on the surface, think these are sophisticated, smart, successful people. It's just an area that just nobody really wants to deal with.
Well, so maybe that's an okay place to start out is, with the will, for example. I mean, it's maybe or at least in my mind, seems like maybe the lowest barrier to entry, the easiest version of some type of estate planning you could get into. Can we talk a little bit about, do I need a will? When's the right time to get one?
Well, look, almost anybody that's an adult should have a will. Let's start with the basics. So let's look at the most simple thing. If you are single, you're not married, you don't have any children, and you don't have any money.
I'm raising my hand.
But you have no will? Yeah, I guess you could have no will because you don't have really anybody you need to leave anything to, and you don't really have anything to leave. But, when you get above that and like, you're a young person, you're married, clearly when you get married, you have decisions to make. Every state has certain rules as to you can't disinherit a spouse. So, whether you have a prenup, you don't have a prenup, how much do you want to leave your spouse? What do you want to leave to your parents or your brothers or sisters? So it starts there. Then once you have kids, you get into what am I leaving to my kids versus what am I leaving to my spouse, or what am I leaving to my family, my brothers, sisters, parents. Obviously, when you have children, the most important reason to have a will, which is the main reason people don't have wills, is the guardian of your children. Because if you don't name a guardian, then the courts are going to name a guardian. And that's never going to be who you necessarily wanted it to be. So many times what happens as a young couple is like, well, I don't want your brother or sister to be the guardian. And they say, well, I don't want your brother or sister to be the guardian. I don't want your parents to be the guardian. I don't want your parents to be the guardian. So like they're fighting over like who's going to be the guardian. But the funny thing is that unless they die together, which let's face it is very, very unusual, whoever they pick when the first one dies, the other one's just going to go redo their wills and pick whoever they want to be the guardian. So really that fight is really only over if they go off a bit with to jointly die and somebody has to be the guardian. But it's so important to pick somebody to be the guardian because, you have to really think it out. And you have to talk to the person you're picking as a guardian. Do they want to be the guardian? You may think, oh, my brother's a great guy and my sister, take care. And they're like, I don't want to take care of your kids. My house isn't big enough. I don't, I got enough stress dealing with my kids. I mean, picture in this day and age with COVID, with parents, homeschooling kids, they're home from school. Now I got my brother or sister's kids I got to take care of at the same time. And you can just imagine the stress that could bring into a house. So, you and your spouse have to decide who you want, and you have to make sure they want to be picked. So, like in the most basic stuff, even without money, once you're married and you have children, you have to have a will. Are there many young people that don't? Of course, because they don't think they're going to die and they don't want to deal with it.
Well, and I suppose it makes sense even for a single person to have maybe at least something. I mean, I suppose by default things maybe go to parents or siblings or something. But even if you were a single person, you'd still maybe want to be able to dictate, X, Y, or Z goes to my friend Jerry, and this goes to my mother, and this goes to whomever. I suppose you still might want to have a little, control over what happens to your things.
Well, Ryan, you're 100% right. If you have something, if you have assets, I mean, like I said before, if you have no assets and no family, there's nothing to pass through the will. But if you have even anything, even if it's $50,000 in a bank account, who gets that? Because if you don't name who gets it, then what happens is the state determines it, and it may not necessarily be, they're not going to give it to a stranger, but between your siblings and your nieces and nephews and your parents, how you may want to divvy it up may not be how the state will divvy it up. So in the most basic, simple terms, you should have a will. And then obviously the more assets you have and the more complicated your situation is, the more important it is to have a will.
Well, let's break down a complicated situation. Say you have a successful business and you have 4 kids. How do you kind of go about breaking the business apart and leaving it to your kids in a will?
Bingo, you started out, this is like the heavyweight match sheet. The roundhouse is the first question. Well, that's really my baby. That's really where I focus my energy. As you mentioned earlier, I've written a book on the subject. That is an impossible question to give a blanket answer to, because everybody has different feelings about it. So I'll give you an example. I used to do a lot of seminars. This is even pre-COVID days. And you'd sit around for dinner after you did the seminar. You got to know the people. And like I remember one evening, I had a table of 4 couples, and they didn't know each other. But they were like fun people, and they were like very open and joking and having a good time. And like I sit down after the seminar, and one of them asked me a question like, well, like I have multiple kids. Like, what do you, initially they said to me, they didn't ask me why. They started with, I know what to do. When I die, I'm just going to have them sell the business and just divvy up the money amongst all the kids. Okay, then the second one goes, you're crazy. You spend all these years building up this business. It's like a family member. Like, I would never do that. I'm just going to leave the business to all my kids. And then the third one goes, You're crazy. How do you leave your business to all your kids? You have one kid in the business, you have 2 or 3 kids not in the business. That's a nightmare. You're going to leave them fighting one another because 2 of them don't even know anything about the business, and they're going to dictate to the one who's in the business what to do. And then the 4th one says, you're all crazy. I'm going to leave the business to my kid in the business, but I'm going to leave shares to the other kids, but they're going to have non-voting shares, and I'm going to give the voting shares to my kid in the business. And then they looked at me and they said, well, Steve, what's the right answer? I'm like, every single one of those answers may be the right answer for you, because my job isn't to tell you what to do. My job is to tell you what are the different things and different ways you can accomplish your goals, and what are the pluses and minuses. And then you have to decide as a business owner. So generally, like if you were to say to me, what's usually the best approach, assuming that you have the right group of assets, the best approach is normally to leave the child that's in the business. And if you could find a way to treat your other kids, I'm not going to say necessarily equally, but in your mind as fairly as possible, because you have enough other things to leave your other kids, that's going to usually be the best way to do it, because they're still not going to be happy, because one of the kids who gets the other things is going to think their brother or sister who's getting the business like, oh, this is baloney. Like, dad built this business, or dad and mom built this business. Like, my brother has nothing to do with this business's success, and he's being handed this business. He's going to make a lot more money than we're making with this business, and he didn't really have anything to do with that. And then the son or daughter that's in the business is going to say, the only thing I was left is the business. I don't have anything other than a business. So there's a lot of risk here with this business. If this business doesn't succeed, I'm done. Plus, if it's a big business, that son or daughter owes major estate taxes on the value of that business, and they don't have any liquidity. How are they going to pay the taxes? So he's sitting there, or she's sitting there going, I'd rather be like my brothers and sisters and get, X millions of dollars of cash or some real estate, and I have no risk, and I can kind of go on with my life. So it's very, very, very complicated. And I can, as we have our talk today, I can go through and give you very, very specific fact patterns of things I've seen and the kind of problems that arise out of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've had sort of a small version of this, a will addressed in the first place, but then when it got to the second generation, it sort of became a problem. So it's sort of like what you're describing. We have a family cabin grandma and grandpa built, and they, between the 2 of them, had 5 children. So they passed down this thing in equal parts across the 5 siblings. And, now just recently, one of those siblings has passed away. My mother, for example, just has me, an only child, where some of my other aunts and uncles have several children, 3 or 4 kids. And so there's, we're sort of already looking down the line and looking at the problem that when this comes to the next generation, if everybody were to just get sort of their share, right? So they, my aunt and her 3 kids split it up, and each of them get a third of her shares. But my shares, because I'm the one only child, become more powerful than everyone else's shares. That, like, what's that going to end up doing? And, so we're already sort of experiencing that on such a small level. But I can imagine when you're talking millions of dollars, things like this, or, large companies or big estates or whatever, I imagine it could get real messy real quick.
Well, it's interesting you mention it, because it's actually a very good example. That is what you just gave as an example is one of the best scenarios of where fighting and conflict and litigation comes into play, because you hit it right on the head. Let's say you have 5, there's 5, siblings. So 1/5 theoretically is for each of the kids. And you now are entitled to 100% of that 1/5. So you could be saying, well, I get 10 weeks of the house is mine because I own 1/5. And then, one of the other sides has 5 kids and they each get 2 weeks. And it's like, that's not fair. You're getting 10 weeks. I get 2 weeks. You should pay, much more of the expenses than anybody else because you're getting to use it the most. And like, it just becomes a nightmare. And that's why it's hard, because it's like an heirloom to the family. Like, how much time has the family spent at that house and remembering grandma and grandpa, so many good times that it's like the family doesn't want to lose that. They want to keep that. But when all of a sudden 15 different people have to make decisions about should we put a new roof on? Should we, buy the property next door? You could just imagine what kind of fighting comes. Some kids have money, other kids don't have money. I don't want to spend money. You want to spend money. So sometimes those things, unfortunately, either you just sell the house and just give everybody the money, and this way they can go buy their own houses, or maybe one of the people says, I really want this, and I'll buy you all out so I can kind of have it. So,
yeah. And it's funny that that's the sort of the solution you arrived at, because that's sort of where we're at now is, maybe, one portion of the family ends up buying it outright and just sort of pays everybody else out for their share of it or whatever. And I think, it seems like a natural solution, because you're right. What it is it's got this emotional component to it. It's not just a business deal, for example, with somebody else. Yep. It's got this emotional component tied up in it where it's, this is where we grew up. This was grandma and grandpa's place, all these different things. And so then when it does come to that, it I guess makes it difficult to make decisions. But then as it starts to trickle down to this next generation, or maybe the generation after that, all of a sudden you've got 20 different owners, and it's like, it's just not practical.
And it's interesting because it's amazing how many brothers and sisters, because that's usually where the litigation comes in. When mom and dad are not there, all the built up stuff that existed for all the years that like people kind of kept close to the vest because they wanted to not get their parents mad because maybe they get disinherited. So they kind of quiet, and then mom and dad are not there anymore. And it's like everything gets loose, but it's like stupid stuff. Like who gets the china, or mom has like 3 pieces of jewelry and maybe she has 3 daughters, and like which one she gives to each of the 3 kids. And like, like one of them is insulted because like, everybody really wanted that one ring or that one necklace. And like, why did my sister get it? And a lot of times what causes the problems is that mom and dads are usually more guilty of this than moms, but mom or dad doesn't want conflict. So they don't say anything to the kids while they're alive. They're like, I know if I bring this up now, there's going to be fighting. And I want to see my grandkids. I love my grandkids. I don't want, like, maybe it's my son's wife gets pissed, and now my daughter-in-law is like, okay, I'll teach your parents a lesson. They're not seeing their grandkids anymore. So like the parents sometimes just like say, I know I should talk about these things. I know I should let everybody know what we're thinking, but I know if I do it, they're going to get pissed. So you know what? When we're dead, they'll deal with it. And maybe they won't come visit us at the cemetery, but it is what it is. So that's a lot of times what causes those issues.
That's so, I have family members right now that are kind of going through that right now. Like, well, the wife doesn't like the other wife and this and that. And it's just like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. I never had to deal with any type of relationships like that. But when you put like a house into the equation, or, the, family piano, or the nice assets that people are going to fight over, that just exacerbates everything. Our family, like the way my grandma does it, she takes you aside and she says, what do you want to put your name on the back of? It's so funny to me. It's just like I've never actually had to sit down and think about stuff like this before. Is there a proper way to kind of go about this and actually, have a plan in mind and have these discussions in advance instead of letting the kids fight it out in court?
Well, look, clearly planning and talking it out, if you have the courage to do it, is always better, because you still could change your mind as to how you do things, and it gives everybody a chance to air out stuff. If you're not going to address it, then probably the next best thing to do if you don't address it is, besides your will, prepare like a 5-page, like kind of like my non-formal last will and testament, but like, how did I come to these conclusions? Like, why did I leave you this? And why did I leave you this? So at least the kids, if they never were told it while mom and dad were alive, at least they understand, because nobody puts that in a will. Like, you don't see in the will, oh, I give the china to my daughter, and the reason I give the china to my daughter is for That's you. It says I give the china to my daughter. It doesn't give why. So if you're not going to take the time to do it while you're alive, the next best thing is to either videotape it or write it out and really address how you really thought this thing out and why you did it that way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I wanted to ask you, go ahead, Mike.
No, go right ahead.
I was just going to say, so, I mean, I think this is sort of an extension of this will conversation, but I wonder if you've noticed, just because you've been at this for so long, how do people plan for retirement today? Like, so it seems like, in sort of this gig economy, you've got more and more people working for themselves, maybe putting off retirement, sort of in a traditional way, sort of like, they're not paying into a 401k or they're not getting, price matched or a pension or something through an employer. And then also there's, I think, a lot of people doing sort of an alternative version of retirement, which was you used to be, you'd work your whole life and then retire. Now you've got a lot of people who are trying to live while they're young and, and we'll worry about retirement maybe later. And so I wonder if you talk a little bit about just sort of how you've seen retirement evolve from sort of, this traditional work in the coal mine all day, all night, and then eventually you're dead, but you've got your pension to fall back on versus, maybe some of these, independent contractors or people who are running around living their own life.
Look, I think you're hitting upon a lot of great points. Just like the, planning when you die, planning for retirement is like, I mean, yes, you're 65 years old and you're not thinking about your retirement, then something's wrong with you. But, a lot of people who are younger than that, same thing, like retirement. I don't need to think about retirement. So,
well, to be honest with you, I'm that guy. I haven't thought about retirement until I've had conversations with people like you. It's like one of those, you don't really think. I'm a DJ. I play music. I, drink beer at a nightclub and then, save money to buy speakers, not for retirement. You know what I mean? And so it's kind of like now I'm at this point in my life where I've got a lot of speakers, I've got a lot of records, but I don't have a lot of money in the bank to live on if I, want to retire. I'm 37, so I have a little time, hopefully. But at the same time, I mean, like I'm the exact person for his question.
Well, look, it's an interesting thing, especially your generation. Because what you find is that your generation doesn't seem like a generation that's going to want to work until they're 65, 70 years old.
I like my job. I might be doing it.
It's fun. But I see I don't know if I want to work. I mean, you could always do gigs, like you said, and do independent stuff and make a few dollars. But I don't see it being that, certainly it's not that I'm going to stay at that company and work till I'm 65 years old and retire. That clearly doesn't exist. So you have that. And then I think people have no clue of how much money you really need when you retire. Because thankfully, and obviously, God willing, we overcome this soon, but people are going to live a lot longer. Like your generation, I mean, think about what's happened in medicine and what's going to happen every single year. I mean, look, I'm not an expert at this, but there's no doubt in my mind that at some point we're all going to have a chip floating around the inside of our body, taking pictures of us inside, no radiation, looking at our blood vessels, seeing if we have blockages, and then popping up on your iPhone and saying, we don't like something we see there. There's a picture. You go to your doctor. Now, it doesn't mean you can't get sick, but people are going to catch things so much quicker than we catch it quicker today than our parents did. And you guys are going to catch it a lot quicker. And personalized medicine and genetic testing and stem cell research and just all the stuff that's going on, people are going to live, God willing, a long time. And they're not going to want to work until they're 90 years old. So, in the old days, it would be like, okay, Social Security started when you were 62, and half the population died before they got to 62, and the other half, most of them were dead once they reached their 70s. Now people are retiring, and they can live till they're 90. Your generation, who knows, you can live till you're 110. You retire when you're 60 years old, you live for 50 years. You need a lot of money to be able to live your life for that period of time. So I just think so few people are financially prepared for retirement. You hit upon great points. The old days of working in the union or working at a big company, GM, and You have a defined benefit plan, and when you retire, they pay you, $100,000 a year for the rest of your life, plus Social Security, plus you could earn interest on your money. So if you had some money saved and you put it in a bond and you could earn 5%, now you earn nothing in a bond. You have no defined benefit plan, and you want to retire. Like, how are you going to live?
And we may not even have that Social Security by the time we're ready to retire.
Well, that's another whole thing. So, and you're going to live long. It doesn't mean you're going to have major medical expenses. You may have to go to a facility and have long-term care, where today most people go into a facility, maybe they live 2-3 years. By the time I reach that age, there's going to be people living 15 years in a facility. You could have Alzheimer's and stay alive for 15 years. By your generation, maybe there won't be Alzheimer's, there'll be something else, but who knows how long. So I think you hit upon, a very, very important thing. And it's just, people are just unprepared for retirement, and they have no clue of how much money they really need. Because my definition of rich is you never have to work again, and you could have a long, long retirement and have more than enough money to never need to worry. That's a lot of money. Like if you're somebody that you're making $500,000 a year and you're spending $200,000-$300,000 a year on your lifestyle, and you retire when you're 65 years old, you need millions of dollars to make sure there's enough money there to live through your retirement. And I've spoken to friends of mine that make a lot of money, that are smart people. And like, I sit there and I go, I don't say this to them, but to myself, I say, you're just clueless. You have no idea how much money you need. And some of them are in businesses, and all of a sudden they retire from their business, and they don't realize now how much in expenses they now have to pay for personally that they used to pay for in their business. So they kind of never even thought about it. Now their car lease they're paying for personally, their health insurance they're paying for personally, a lot of their meals and entertainment they're paying for personally. And they have no idea the amount of money you need. So clearly when you're young, the more you could put away when you're young, that just gives you a lot of runway. As you get older and the longer you wait to start putting money away, you need more and more and more to put away, and it becomes more difficult.
So how do you start? I mean, for me, like if I were to go as a self-employed person making $80,000 a year, what do I do? Well,
one of the things you could do is you could set up a retirement plan. So when you're self-employed, you have the flexibility to put a retirement plan. If you don't, I'm going to assume, let's say you don't have any employees. So if you have no employees, you could just sock away a lot of money for yourself. So that becomes you're getting a tax deduction when you do it. So you're reducing how much you pay in taxes. And now you're putting that money into an account, and you're not paying any income taxes as that money grows. I mean, you're going to when you pull it out, but by then maybe you're 70 years old. So if you could put away $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a year into a pension plan every year, you're getting a good head start. And that forces you not to spend it, okay? Then if you're single, it's something you're generally not going to do, but some people buy like cash value life insurance, because if they have kids, they need insurance, and it's also a forced saving. They get a premium, they have to put money away, so they accumulate money in that. So they got to pay their premium, so they can't like spend it on something else. So, those are some of the things that somebody can do. But you have your own business, you're going to sit there and go, I could put $20,000 away into this retirement plan, but if I invest that $20,000 in my business, I think I could make a lot more money, and that may be a better way to spend the money, to invest it in yourself, in your business. But if you're pissing it away on just like going out drinking and going out eating and going on vacations, and the money's just, it's not anything that's going to make your business better and help you become more successful, then you're better off doing things like I mentioned than just pissing it away.
Makes sense. We've had a few people on that have talked about the life insurance, kind of like what the Rockefellers would do, and using that as almost like a revolving bank account where you put it in. If you want to take a loan out against it, you can, and buy a car, and then you pay yourself back into your life insurance. And I've heard mixed reviews on that. Do you have any opinions on that? Do you have any suggestions on Well, you actually mentioned earlier, like you mentioned a group of assets. Do you have a suggestion on what the ideal group of assets are? A little bit of real estate, a little bit of life insurance, a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Well, let me address, you asked me a couple of things. So let me first
Sure.
address the insurance, and then I'll answer the other question. There's almost nothing that is like right or it's wrong. There's pluses and minuses. One thing I can tell you is that everybody, and I mean everybody, has an opinion about life insurance. Like, just like everybody's got an opinion about Donald Trump, everybody's got an opinion about life insurance. There's nobody who's like, I have no opinion. And there are people that don't like life insurance at all, which, to me, that's almost like foolish, because if you have reasons to protect your family, you should have some insurance. But some people are like, if I buy insurance, I'm going to die, or I could do better things with my money. Then you have people who are like, I know I need life insurance, and I'm only going to buy term insurance. Term insurance is basically where you don't build up any value. It's the least expensive, and it's great. It's insurance. It's a great product. Everybody who has life insurance needs term insurance, should be part of it. And then you have whole life and variable life and index life. You have all these others, which, we could do a whole show on these things. That there are a lot of people who say, I don't think of life insurance as an investment. Like, I'd rather, buy term insurance and invest my money in something else and get a better return. And that's not necessarily wrong. And then there are people who are like, I like that forced savings. I like to know I'm going to have the insurance the rest of my life, because you'd be surprised how many people I meet that are in their 60s that need insurance and they don't have it anymore, and they got to go out and get it when they're 60 years old for like estate reasons and things like that. So it's not a right or a wrong. Like, when I recommend people with insurance, I look at it like every other asset class. Like, you should have different companies with different kinds of products. It should be almost like an asset allocation within insurance, because there's no one product or one company that's the best. The problem you'll find is that there are certain insurance companies, I could probably get in trouble mentioning names, but I'll mention them. You have companies like New York Life, Mass Mutual, Guardian, Northwestern Mutual. These are captive insurance companies which have these agents that, like, they drink the Kool-Aid, like they're trained, like, sell whole life, go out there and sell whole life. And like, all they do is sell whole life, and from that company. They're not going out to the market. They're not saying, okay, you should buy whole life, and maybe you should buy some from Guardian and some from Northwestern and some from Mass Mutual and some from New York Life. It's like, whatever their company is, that's what they're selling. And a lot of times I'll meet people that are way underinsured, and they're underinsured because they bought a whole life policy that they couldn't really afford, and they have, $500,000 of insurance when they should have $5 million of insurance, but they can't afford it because they've spent so much on the whole life. So my feeling is you need to make sure you have the right amount of coverage, which the term insurance is the foundation for doing that, especially on younger people, because it's very inexpensive. And then maybe you take a piece, maybe 20% of your insurance, and you put it into like a whole life policy, so it's part of an overall portfolio. So that would be how I would address your insurance question, which, you're right, people have different opinions about it, and none of them are necessarily right or wrong. As far as assets, I mean, clearly when you're young, you have a long time before hopefully you're going to need those assets. So clearly putting your money in the market, stock market, real estate. I mean, with real estate, you have to decide, are you going to invest in real estate that you're going to manage and own on your own? That requires a lot of time and expertise. Are you going to invest in funds that specialize in real estate, so it's more of a passive investment, but you have money in that sector? People should have a diversification of assets. And when they're young, those assets should be geared mostly towards things that have a big upside from a return standpoint and have more risk, because they have time to deal with that risk. When you're 60 years old and you're going to work for another 5 years, you have to have a different perspective on how you invest your assets, because, look what happened in the market. I mean, when this market went down 35, 40%, A lot of people sold. They couldn't deal with, they were too afraid. And then they go back in when the market goes back up 40%. And that's how you lose a lot of money in the market. So you have to be able to deal with that. You have to know who you are and your character. But if you're young and you can kind of put blindfolds on and say, I don't need this money for a long time, clearly having your money in a diversified asset, base of real estate and stocks. Young people shouldn't have a lot in bonds, especially today where you can't earn anything on your money. So I'm hoping that answers your question.
It does. The reason I ask is like my parents are the perfect example. They a lot of their retirement's in the market, and having it dip down low is super scary for them. And real estate's the other one for them. So it's kind of like, is the market the place to put? Is like when it comes to retirement, when do you pull it out of the market? Do you just leave it in there and then let your kids inherit that, or it's kind of this weird. You almost have to go to college to know how to manage your finances, and a lot of us don't do that. And so there's a lot of questions out there, a lot of like, what if, how. You're the expert. That's why we have you on.
It gets back to what I said before. Unfortunately, there's no right, wrong. So within every age group and wealth, you have to look at the personality of the people. If you either are going to need access to money soon, or you do not have the stomach to deal with a big dip in the market, you can't be in the market, because you're not going to be able to stomach it, and you're going to pull the money out at the wrong time, and you're going to go back in the wrong time, and you're going to get clobbered. Okay, forget tax issues that you're going to deal with as well. So you have to know who you are. The problem, and this goes back to my retirement thing and my concern, is that, picture yourself today. You're 65, 70 years old. You've been fortunate enough. You've saved a couple of $1 million. You're going to need $100,000, $200,000 a year to live your retirement. If you're not in the market, well, what are you in? What are you going to put your money in? Cash and earn nothing? Bonds and earn nothing? So just inflation is going to destroy your retirement, because you're not going to get any income or appreciation on your assets. And as you live, your expenses just by inflation are going to go up every year, and you're going to deplete your entire asset base. But if you put too much of it in a market and you don't have the stomach for it, and you're going to keep pulling it out, you're going to get killed. So that's the big problem today, because that's why people need more money for their retirement than they used to, because they're going to probably live longer, which I think we would all agree that my generation is going to live longer than my parents' generation, and God willing, your generation is going to live longer than my generation. And you're in an environment today where you can't earn anything on your money. I mean, why do you think the stock market, like, you sit there and scratch your head? I scratch my head and go like, this makes no sense. I mean, we could have this COVID thing for another year. Like during the wintertime, who knows how many people are going to die? Who knows what businesses are going to get shut down? And the stock market is higher than it was before COVID. And you sit and go like, are you kidding me? Well, why is it that way? Well, it's for two reasons, I think. Number one, everybody believes the Fed is almost backstopping everything. Like the Fed's not going to let the market go down too much, because they know how much that's going to hurt the economy. So the Fed's just going to keep doing things to keep the market going up, okay? And interest rates are at zero. So you have no place else to put your money. I mean, what are you going to sit with your money in a bank and earn, 0.1% interest? So the problem for your parents, going back to your analogy, is that if they don't have the stomach for the market, but there's nothing else to put their money in, and God willing, your parents, at least one of them, lives into their 90s, how are they going to have enough money to survive retirement? It's going to become very, very, very difficult. And so it almost is forcing everybody to have more risk with their assets, and they're going to have to be able to stomach that risk, because if they don't, then they're going to really put themselves in a tough position. So again, I'm hoping there's no like right answer to your question, but I hope I'm kind of hitting upon what you're trying to get at.
Yeah, there's just so many moving parts, and I'm not the one to know all the ins and outs of it. I'm still early in this, and so I'm probably asking stupid questions for what it comes down to.
You're not asking stupid questions.
Well, so one of the things you keep mentioning, right, is that there's no really right or wrong. And I think that this is something that I've stumbled across a lot recently, is just sort of embracing fluidity and understanding that, life is going to have ebbs and flows and ups and downs. But ultimately, if you kind of, like you said, if you have the stomach to tolerate it, eventually you'll probably end up in an all right spot. And, of course, no guarantees. And knowing that there's no rights and wrongs, I guess, what are common mistakes or things that we can avoid? So we've spent a lot of time talking about sort of individuals and how an individual might prepare for retirement. But back to the ideas, when we're I guess on both the personal side and sort of the business side, are there, I don't know, certain mistakes you see or certain pitfalls that people are stepping in with regularity that might be things that could be easily avoided if they're pointed out in advance?
Yeah, there's probably a lot. We can kind of bounce all over the place. So let me try to think. And I'm going to stay away from necessarily like estate planning and wills. We kind of talked about that. I'm going to deal more with like financial types of things. So look, I'll hit upon like a no-brainer one. Anybody that works for a company that has a 401k that is going to match a certain amount of money you put in your 401k, you have to be out of your mind not to make that contribution, because many times it's like either dollar for dollar or 50 cents on a dollar. So like if I put in $5,000 and the company's going to put in $5,000, I just got 100% return on my money overnight. Like that seems like a pretty good deal. Would you guys like 100% return on your money every year? It's pretty good.
Of course.
So that's like one of the most common stupid things for people not to do that. So, I would say that's a no-brainer. And then I'd say maxing out, like trying to put the most you could put into a retirement plan or a 401k, that's another great idea, because otherwise people you spend the money. I mean, I'm not talking about somebody who's got millions and millions of dollars that they can't spend everything they make. But, somebody who makes $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, you end up spending it. You spend it on stupid stuff. But if you put it away into your retirement plan, it's kind of like it comes out of your paycheck, and it's not there to spend. So I would say not putting in the amount to be matched, and then secondarily, not maxing out what you could put in a retirement plan, to me, are some of the big mistakes people make. Other mistakes people make, they don't have any insurance. I'm talking about not a single guy or gal. I'm talking about people with wives and husbands and families. They haven't bought any life insurance. They haven't looked at disability insurance. What happens if, you get sick, you don't die, but you can't work anymore. Now, a lot of times when you work for a big company, you may get some life insurance and some disability insurance through the company, but it's usually not enough. And if you don't work for a big company, then you have to do it yourself. So like that's a big area. Other big areas, people don't look at sometimes some of the fees, expenses, and tax ramifications of some of the things that they're doing. So like as an example, and the laws changed recently, when you have somebody manage your money, and let's say you're paying them, 1% to manage your money. So let's use a scenario. They do a reasonable job. I earn 7% on the money they're managing for me, and then I'm paying them 1%. So I'm really making 6%. Forget taxes for a minute. The problem is that I have to pay tax on that 7%, at least whatever amount of that is interest, dividends, or capital gains. But I can't deduct the 1% that I'm paying them as a fee. So I'm not really, it's not like I'm netting 6 and paying tax. I'm potentially paying tax on the 7, and then I'm not getting to deduct the 1. So that 1 is more costly, okay? So what fees you pay somebody could really, really eat into your returns, especially on an after-tax basis. Also, sometimes people put their money in investments that are not efficient from a tax standpoint. So today, what's become very popular is people go and buy index funds. They go to Vanguard and they buy, let's say, a portfolio of index funds, which is a great way to invest because you're probably paying only like 10 to 20 basis points in expenses. And if you just leave it alone, the only taxes you're going to pay is on the dividends that you get, which is, usually a couple of percent. Most of it is in the capital appreciation. So, but sometimes people hire somebody to manage their money, and now they're paying a layer of fees on top of that. And they could get value out of it, depending who they're using. But that extra 1% or 1.5% of a non-deductible fee could really eat into your returns. So you have to be very, very cognizant of that. Those are, there's probably, if I sat here and thought, I could probably come up with another dozen of them easily, but those are some of the more common mistakes people make.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
You mentioned capital gains, and this is a topic that comes up all the time, and I honestly don't know much about it, but I know there's ways to do things as far as, to avoid paying a bunch of it, especially when you're talking about inheritance with your kids and strategies behind it. Are there some good strategies to avoid paying a bunch of capital gains tax?
Well, let's put them in two different categories. You got capital gains, and then you have like estate taxes, which
okay.
I'll go over after. So look, the biggest control you have over what you pay in capital gains tax is by selling or not selling things. So when you sell Apple, a particular stock or a mutual fund or a fund or something that you sell to get out of, either because you need the money or you're concerned where the market is, you're going to pay capital gains tax. And things that you sell that you hold for less than a year, you're paying short-term capital gains, which is taxed like ordinary income. So, it's taxed, you get into state taxes and Obama tax, from the Affordable Care Act. And, when you add all of those things up, when it's ordinary income, it could be, short-term capital gain could be mid 40s to 50% tax. Capital gain is 20 plus, the state tax could be another 5 or 10% plus the Obama tax is another 3.8%. So that could be like in, 30, mid 30s. That's if it's long-term. So obviously not selling stops that. But even if you don't sell, like if you have a mutual fund or you have a money manager managing your money and you're not selling out of the fund or you're not selling out of the manager, but they're trading, capital gains taxes could be caused, capital gains, which then lead to taxes, could be caused by how the fund or the manager is managing that money, which is why you need to look at not only the kind of performance that you can get from a manager or a mutual fund, but how tax efficient it is. Because you could have one fund that maybe has averaged a little bit less of a return, but is much more tax efficient, and thus your after-tax return is much higher. So that's some of the things you need to look at there. Estate taxes is a whole nother
ball of wax.
A whole nother ball of wax. So first off, and look, a lot could depend on what happens in this election. If Donald Trump wins, even if the Democrats control the Senate and the House, most of the current tax laws are going to stay because he'll just veto it and then never going to have enough votes to override a veto. If Trump loses and the Republicans maintain the Senate and the Democrats most probably are going to keep the House, then again, even if Biden comes in as president, he's not going to necessarily be able to change things because the Senate, which will be controlled by the Republicans, are not going to agree to it. If Biden wins and the House goes to the Democrats and the Senate goes to the Democrats, but the Senate is like 51-49, there's a lot of things that you can't do in the Senate without 60 votes. So even some things he still won't get done. You've probably heard people mention this filibuster, that they may want to get rid of the filibuster. That's what they did with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court used to require 60 votes in the Senate. The Republicans got rid of the filibuster because the Democrats got rid of the filibuster for some other judges. So when Harry Reid was there, he got rid of it. So then McConnell got rid of it. And that's the reason the Republicans were able to get Gorsuch and Kavanaugh to get through, because all they needed was votes from the Republicans to get it through. In the past, that wouldn't have been the case. So now the Democrats are threatening to get rid of filibuster, and then they could get things done on their own. But the odds are, if Biden wins and the Democrats control the Senate and the House, there's going to be some changes to the estate taxes, most probably. See, right now, from a federal standpoint, you could have a $20 million estate and pay no federal estate taxes. States have lower exemptions, but you need to be very, very wealthy to worry about estate taxes today. But if Biden gets to change things, he could go back and say, we're going to lower the exemption to $2-3 million a person. And now you could have a $5 million estate subject to estate taxes. So I would say, I don't know what percentage of your listeners are, super high net worth. They need to do sophisticated planning, and I could do a whole talk on just sophisticated estate planning. But I would say if, most of your listeners are not at that level, I would say estate taxes is probably, at least pre-election, isn't going to be a big issue.
Yeah, it's crazy to think of all the different ins and outs and things that cause this versus that, and why you would vote for this guy over that guy just on your tax planning. Like, to me, I've never actually thought of the elections in that regard. It's like, if I vote for this guy, how's it going to affect my bottom line on my income or my taxes or this or that? Usually it's, do I like the guy? Do I trust the guy? That's kind of been my voting history based off of that. I've never really taken that into consideration before. So that's interesting to think about.
And look, there's no question that when Trump ran the first time against Hillary, there were probably a percentage of people who voted for Trump because they didn't like Hillary. There was a percentage of people who voted for Trump that didn't really like Trump, but they knew it was better for their pocketbook because they were wealthy and they knew the Republicans would do things to make taxes less than Democrats. And now you could have people who say, I like Biden, but it's going to hurt my pocketbook, so I'm going to vote for Trump, even though I like Biden. So you're right. A lot of times there's different reasons people make decisions. I want to go back to one other thing, though. You asked me about mistake. I will tell you what I believe. I see this. What I believe is a big, big mistake people make. And I get why they do it. It's not like I'm oblivious to why they do it, but it's people's lack of openness to talk to other people. And what do I mean by that? It's like, like one of the things I offer to people at the end, we'll talk about it, is like I offer people a free book on business succession planning. And like, I'll do certain marketing and I'll offer that book to somebody for free. And their reaction will be, oh, I've taken care of it already. And I sit there and I scratch my head and I go, I don't say this to them, but like I scratch my head and I go, wait a minute. I'm offering you a book for free that gets into so much stuff that you're going to learn from, and you don't want it. Now, I know why they don't want it, because they feel there's now an obligation by them taking it that they owe me something, and they don't want to necessarily talk to me or meet with me because I'm going to try to sell them or do something to them. So they opt not to take the book because they don't want that obligation. The problem today is, generally people they have their accountant, they have a lawyer, they may have a financial planner, a financial advisor, they could have an insurance person. And the bottom line is you should be open-minded because you should talk to people. That doesn't mean you shouldn't use your people. It doesn't mean you don't necessarily go back to your people and say, somebody told me something, what do you think? But there's so much out there today and nobody knows everything. Like, I have a very multidisciplinary, broad background. Like my background, I'm a CPA, so I could talk about taxes, financial statements, investments, legal stuff, even though I'm not a lawyer, estate planning, insurance. I mean, I tap into so many areas that I have a lot of knowledge in, and people like that because I can almost help them in almost any area, but I don't know everything. Nobody can know everything. And so many people are just closed-minded to talk to somebody else because they're kind of afraid they're going to sell me something or push something on me. And look, everybody's selling something. You're selling something, everybody's selling something. But you need to be more open-minded. So I say, if you ask me what I think is one of the biggest mistakes I find is the lack of openness that people have to just talk to somebody new and hear what they have to say.
No, I think that's great. And, and it is a challenge. I mean, like Mike mentioned earlier, we've had a lot of people on talk about insurance, things like that. Like, it does get a little bit noisy out there sometimes, and I think the internet and social media and stuff contribute a lot to this, where, it would be much easier to hear somebody out if you weren't being blasted with 12 of those every day or 50 of those or 100, or, whatever. And so, but I definitely agree with the sentiment. I mean, so much of life has to do with, relationships with other people and these sorts of things. And hopefully you're building networks of confidants and people like that you can trust, networks of people who can provide insight and things. I think that's all really critical. So
another thing I was going to mention, Ryan, that's frustrating also. I actually was thinking about starting a website about a year or two ago, and I was going to call it Smarter Than the Salesman. The idea of the site was going to be a site to educate people, and so they had a place to go to without anybody selling them something, to really get into all the weeds of things and be, in essence, the worst nightmare to a salesman, because the knowledge, that site would know more than most salesmen know, and they don't want the client to be that smart. And part of the problem of getting things off the ground is, like, you would think that people would pay for that, but like, people don't want to pay for that advice. They're like, oh, my Merrill Lynch guy will do that for me for nothing. Well, yeah, he's not doing it for nothing. He's selling you stocks and bonds and funds and insurance. Or my insurance guy is going to do it. Everybody's making money doing something. You have to be willing to pay something to get 100% objective advice. And you just find people are not willing to pay for it. They want the advice, but they don't want to pay for objective advice. So they go where they don't have to pay for it, and then they're not getting objective advice. So that's another kind of catch-22 that exists.
Yeah, no, I think it's so true. I mean, that is, definitely, it's again, another problem with just sort of all the noise out there right now that, it's really hard to sort of, I guess, separate the good from the bad and know the people who are sort of, just a really great salesperson versus somebody who actually gives a crap about you. I think that there's so much competition for the little bit of time that we have for everything that, unfortunately, people kind of ruin this for other folks. They make it hard to trust and hard to take the time and listen, right? Because just everybody's got a soapbox these days.
Yeah, well, Stephen, actually, your website has a really good blog on it. I've been reading a couple of your articles in preparation for this interview, and it's shgplanning.com. And there's a lot to learn from a lot of different people, but I think that's a good starting point. And podcasts with guests like you and other financial planning podcasts is probably another good resource to go and just kind of, for guys like me who aren't really in the financial world or the retirement planning world or this or that, you have to take the first step and start learning, because if you don't start learning, you're just going to be ignorant and you're not going to know or make the first steps in the first place. So I think it's important that if you have a desire to invest and have a desire to succeed and move forward in life, you have to kind of take that initial step and go and read articles and listen to podcasts and do things that are going to advance your knowledge base. So
it's so right what you just said. I appreciate you mentioning my blog. It is a catch-22, Ryan. It goes back to what you mentioned. On one side, there is so much information out there. So you really could educate yourself a lot, but there's just so much. And it's like, where do you start and where do you stop? And how do I know whether somebody has an agenda or they don't have an agenda and what they're trying to do? Like the easiest way for somebody to do something is, you always have the ability to say to somebody, I will pay you for your time. How much do you charge per hour? But I don't want you to sell me anything. I mean, you always have the ability to do that. And the two reasons that doesn't work a lot of times is A, the amount that somebody's going to charge you is going to be if they're going to do that, they're going to charge you enough money that you're going to sit there and go, I don't know if I want to pay that amount of money. That's a lot of money just to get it, but at least I'm getting somebody objective. And the person you're asking it to, if they're really good, if they really, really are smart and they really know their stuff, their time is valuable. And if their only way to make money is by getting a fee to provide that advice, they're going to want to get a nice amount of money to provide that advice. So it ends up making that cost of entry expensive. And that's why it doesn't happen enough, because the customer doesn't want to pay that much, and the expert doesn't want to give it away for nothing. So they end up going places where they don't have to pay that fee, but then they're dealing with somebody that they don't know for sure if they're getting the most objective advice.
Yeah, I think we've also been a little bit conditioned by the internet, right? Everybody's leading with a free offer or here's a free webinar, a free, whatever. And so I think sometimes our conditioning is sort of worn down that if it's free, it just can't be that great. And, I think there was a time, even earlier in my life, but I think even, maybe more in older generations, where you did have those relationships. You knew the guy that was the finance guy and you could trust him to give you good advice. And maybe he sold some products, but, he was on your team. He was a guy that you had a relationship with. And I think that as the world has become more and more connected via internet and things like that, we're actually, becoming further and further apart in terms of these, near and dear sort of confidant relationships that we might have had in the past. So I think it is a challenge, but I appreciate you doing work towards it. So Steve, here to sort of wrap us up, do you mind just kind of telling people where they can track you down, where they can learn a little bit more about what you do, and perhaps get in touch?
Yeah. So my website is SHG Planning, and if you go there, it'll give you my bio, which we've kind of outlined here. It'll have a lot of testimonials there. I have a blog that was mentioned that has, like almost 60 articles there on all different types of subjects. You can go to a landing page. I have stephengoodman.biz, which is where I have the offer for my free book that I mentioned on business succession planning. My email address is sgoodman@shgplanning.com. And in the COVID days where not everybody's in their office every day, my cell phone is 516-297-7390.
Great. Well, that's awesome, Stephen. Thank you so much. Mike, anything else?
No, just really appreciate your time and really enjoyed the conversation. It had a lot of good questions answered, and I appreciate it.
It was great. I really enjoyed it, guys.
Yeah. Well, so thanks so much to our guest, Stephen, Mike, and I, and thanks to everybody who tunes in this week and every week, and we'll see you all next time.